In business today, three things to know. First, think the Turkey economy burning down doesn't affect you, why you should care, and be afraid. Then, the imperial president, how Barack Obama intends to counter a do-nothing Congress by acting through executive orders on his own. We'll preview the State of the Union address and ask why he is embracing a policy he so criticized for years. And the sweatshop has gone high-tech, how click farms employ low-paid workers overseas to drive internet traffic. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Stocks recovered today on earnings news, even as Apple weighed on the NASDAQ. The Apple haters came out in force today. We also got some economic news that's causing a little bit of confusion. We'll run down all of the earnings news and Apple's slide in a moment. But first, let's talk about the economy. Home prices may have topped out for now. The S&P Case-Shiller Index posted its first month-over-month decline in 10 months. Tuesday, the annual increase in home prices came in at a robust 13.7% in November, but is clearly slowing down. And durable goods orders stumbled. Orders for long-lasting manufactured goods fell in December, which could signal that businesses are turning a little bit more cautious. But consumers out there are feeling better. Consumer confidence hit a 5-month high. We'll have more on the economy in a moment, but first a look at the numbers on Wall Street. And as you could tell, all green for the day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbing 90 points to 15,967, trying to get back to that 16,000 mark. S&P 500 up 11 and the NASDAQ up 14 despite Apple's slide. Apple's share prices dropped by more than 7% today after saying iPhone sales came in below expectations and guided lower for this quarter. But that did not stop activist investor Carl Icahn from buying an additional $500 million of stock and then criticized Apple management for not having a share buyback program. He clearly believes that's what's coming if he is buying the stock. Apple closing at $506.95, down nearly 8%. Comcast, the largest U.S. cable company and the owner of NBC Universal, reporting a 26% increase in fourth quarter profit after adding TV subscribers, get this, for the first time in more than 6 years. Net income rose to just under $2 billion, or 72 cents a share in the quarter. Comcast closing up to $53.35. And rental furniture giant Rent-A-Center, quarterly earnings of 25 cents a share missed analyst estimates of 76 cents. The company blaming higher operating costs. Rent-A-Center closing at $24.30, down 22%. Commodities, gold closing down 9 to $12.54, and oil inching back up to that $100 a barrel level to $97.25. Turkey's central bank held an emergency meeting Tuesday in an effort to halt the lira's steep dive as a sell-off of emerging markets continues. Over the past month, the lira has hit record lows against the U.S. dollar and the euro. This comes amid a backdrop of an ongoing political corruption investigation. So, why should we care about Turkey? Jack Albin from BMO Private Bank, which manages more than $60 billion in assets, has some answers. Jack, welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, so can you sum up for us a little bit of what is going on in Turkey, and as I just sort of previewed, why this impacts the world?
Yeah, I think what's going on in Turkey is similar to what's going on in a lot of emerging economies, and that is you've got economic growth that's relatively fast, but it's starting to slow down. At the same time, many of these economies are suffering with higher inflation than they typically are accustomed to, and having to dampen that down with monetary restrictions. And so all of that together is really causing problems in their economy, problems in their market. And of course, not to mention, throw in corruption allegations, and you have a situation where you don't have a lot of confidence in those markets.
And Jack, why is the lira now collapsing, and what can the country do about it, the central bank in particular, to try to prop it up?
Sure. I think what the central bank is hoping to do is raise interest rates to prop up the currency, to tamp down inflation. And unfortunately, that's just going to force the economic slowdown to happen that much quicker. But I think similar to what we did in the U.S. in the early 80s is, just raise interest rates and try to get your arms around the situation.
Turkey is obviously a key military ally of the United States as well. Could sort of this economic turmoil, in your opinion, spill over to some political problems?
It already has, actually. There are uprisings in many of these countries that we've been talking about, and that is just a consequence of not just the political environment, but potentially the economic environment as well. So, unfortunately, it's a kind of a toxic stew right now that central banks are going to try to get their arms around. Fiscal policymakers are going to try to get their arms around, and investors want to wrap their arms around and figure out what's going on next.
In your opinion, do you think Turkey will stabilize the situation?
I do believe so. I think that these are tests. There's certainly a lot of money has left many of these economies, funneled back to the U.S. It could be the rubber band that ultimately pops, but I think if the central bank continues to raise interest rates to stabilize things, will likely continue forward, no problem.
So let's talk about the broader picture of the emerging markets. Now, not all emerging markets are created equal right now. Are there areas that you particularly like and maybe have less exposure to China, which I guess is some of the concern, even though China continues to grow at a pretty healthy clip?
Right. China's continuing to grow. Obviously, the debt overhang, both on the banking system and the shadow banking system is a concern. Mm-hmm. Policymakers certainly recognize that, and they're trying to shift as much growth around as they can. I think our favorite areas of growth right now are really in the sort of the Eastern Europe bloc. These are countries like Poland that have a relatively cheap currency and that they're able to sell their goods and services into a Eurozone that has, quite honestly, a currency that's probably 10 to 15% too expensive right now.
I've also been hearing about Mexico. Do you like Mexico as part of the new sort of MINT acronym that we keep hearing about?
Yeah, I think Mexico, certainly I've heard anecdotally, could be a beneficiary of some of the turmoil in these emerging countries. Keep in mind that the huge cost advantage that China has had and many of our other emerging trading partners have had over recent years have really closed in a lot of respects. One is the U.S. dollar has dropped pretty significantly on the world stage over the last decade or more, and many of these emerging currencies have risen along with costs and inflation. So moving production back to Mexico could be not only a benefit to Mexico, but also to the United States.
And one last question, Jack. You were in Chicago, so I hope you have your long underwear on. Tell me a little bit about the cold weather and if you've seen any impact on business, other than maybe staying indoors.
Yeah, I mean, I now know what the polar vortex is. I don't think I would have had a clue. I'm now living it. And I do think it's impacting business here. Certainly just in my own situation, I've probably canceled dinner plans with people maybe 4 times over the last few weeks, and have decided to stay in instead of going out to stores or to any kind of entertainment venue. So it certainly has retrenched our household and probably others as well. I will say, yeah, I have my big winter coat on, but I was incidentally outside in my bathing suit yesterday having to start my daughter's car. I was in my bathing suit because I was working out, so it was cold.
Well, you are from Chicago, or you live in Chicago, and I've been there, and certainly you're used to the weather. Jack Ablin, Chief Investment Officer from BMO Private Bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are talking about the polar vortex, which has swept through North America again, grounding airplanes, closing businesses, and making many of our lives downright miserable. On Tuesday, more than 2,000 flights were canceled due to cold weather and freezing rain. Bernie Rayno from AccuWeather is here to update us a little bit about the vortex, the polar vortex we're calling it. Let me ask you this. Isn't it just winter?
Yes, you're 100% correct. It's just winter. The problem is what's been going on is every time there is an extreme weather event in this country, it seems as though everybody stops and thinks, well, this is unusual. Why is this happening? Instead, I think we've got to realize that we live in a country where extreme weather is not the exception. It is the rule. But the kind of cold that we've seen in the upper Midwest and the eastern United States, it has been colder than what we've seen over the last couple of years. And, it's been pretty extreme. We've had lots of snow to talk about as well. and we're getting snow into the southeast. So I think this winter is kind of a slap in the face to remind people that this does happen this time of the year.
Yeah, and it toughens us up a little bit. You know, people complain about going outside, and I get the sense that companies and businesses, publicly traded companies, use the weather as an excuse often when they miss their earnings reports.
Well, certainly the one thing we know about weather, it impacts everybody. And we were talking about your last guest was talking about how it impacts business. It certainly does. And, you know, this kind of weather has been certainly a drain on lots of things. Certainly some of the natural gas and the oil prices are being impacted by how cold it's been. And let's remember, since about early December, while we have had some days where it's been above normal, it's been warmer, we've had more days where it's been cold, and we have had some extreme cold. This, our latest shot, across the upper Midwest and the Northeast.
How do you put the estimate cost to the economy? And the flip side, if you're contrarian, there's somebody making money because of this?
Well, certainly, listen, weather has the power to make money and take it away. Certainly when you take a look at what has happened because of how cold it's been, the strain on natural gas, on propane, on oil, that has certainly impacted the price and certainly helping to take money out of people's wallets. Certainly when you look at the amount of snow that has had to be removed from certain municipalities and cities, and now what's going on in the southeastern United States where many cities and municipalities are not funded and they don't have the snow equipment, this is going to have a huge cost. Of course, we've seen it in the travel industry when you have airports where flights are delayed, hundreds of flights delayed today out of Bush Intercontinental in Houston, out of Atlanta's International Airport. And earlier this year when we had the snowstorms around New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia, that has certainly impacted not only the northeastern United States, but certainly when you are traveling via the plane, when you have those hubs like around New York City, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, that creates ripple
effects throughout the country.
Many delays across the country.
Okay, Bernie, we got to go. Bernie Reno, senior meteorologist from AccuWeather, joining us from State College, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much.
All righty.
Coming up, President Obama is expected to say he's going it alone. A preview of tonight's State of the Union address. You're watching Arise Exchange. Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use. President Obama will make his State of the Union address tonight, his fifth, and this is the second one since winning re-election. Some of the themes that he's expected to touch on include income inequality, immigration, foreign policy, and health care. Patrice Lee of the Independent Women's Forum, a conservative group, joins us with more on what we can expect to hear tonight. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Patrice, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you a little bit about what we might expect from the president tonight. Last year, he went big. Immigration, guns, and some will say he accomplished neither. Do you think he's going to go for smaller gains this time around?
I think he's going to go for the same things that he did last year. We're expecting he's going to rehash and repackage a lot of his priorities. And what this means for Americans is broken promises and disappointing results. What's interesting, and you hit on some of the key issues of gun control and immigration reform. He even talked about universal pre-K. None of those things went anywhere. And so he's going, because he waited for Congress, this time he's going to actually take his presidential executive order to try to make some of these things happen. And that's something very different and unique. And today's, the release or the announcement from the White House about what he's doing with minimum wage for federal contractors is a great demonstration of what he plans on doing for some of his agenda.
And it has little impact, that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you said that he hasn't really accomplished broken promises, for example. But to some extent, that's because Congress has not worked with him.
Well, and that is true. He certainly, for a lot of his agenda items, he's received a lot of blockage in the House and some in the Senate. And so I think he's recognizing that to be able to achieve what he wants to do with his policies, he's going to have to kind of go it alone. And that's an interesting perspective. Certainly, historically, presidents have used executive orders to achieve their agendas.
Well, George Bush signed a lot of executive orders. On the other hand, President Obama criticized him.
Absolutely, he did. And so it's interesting that now he's going to be using the very same tactics. It's a realization that when you're governing, you have to be able to find a way to get others on board, people who don't necessarily agree with you philosophically, get them on board with your policies. If you can't, then you have to look at the policies themselves and wonder, is this the right policy for our nation?
Do you think he's going to address the unemployment and job creation situation adequately, in your opinion?
No, he's not. What you're going to see him do is bypass job creation and focus on things like extending unemployment and spending more money on programs. But really what Americans need are more jobs. Now, as we know, the unemployment rate dropped to about 6.7%, and some may cheer that, but when you consider it's been at 8% for several months, and even more that there are millions of Americans who are unemployed and dropped out of the job market, that's not a good idea.
People have dropped out of the job market. That is really the key. So you do not think that he's going to create jobs here? In fact, can the federal government even create jobs? Let's just ask you that question.
No, but it can certainly create the policies that foster a good environment for our economy to produce jobs. So when you release the stranglehold of burdensome regulations on small businesses, they can then turn around and begin to create the jobs that we need in this country.
Let me ask you about the issue of the minimum wage. He's going to raise the federal minimum wage on new employees. Not a big tack, but you think it's symbolic. It
is. What he's doing, or what he plans to do, is to raise the minimum wage rate from $7.25 to $10.10 for federal contractors. Now, this is not for those who have current contracts, but for those who will have future contracts. It's a limited number of people or a number of workers, but it does send a signal to Congress that, you know what, I have a pen and I'm going to use it. And so I'm expecting you now, Congress, to take the next step, which is to raise the federal minimum wage rate.
Well, okay, well, it may be interesting to see a more aggressive President Obama. Patrice Lee, Senior Fellow, Manager of Outreach at the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Time now for a look at our business ticker, but first, looking at earnings. American Airlines, the world's largest airline now, released its first quarterly results since its merger with U.S. Airways in December. The company reported a fourth quarter adjusted profit of $436 million, or 59 cents a share, topping analysts' expectations of 55 cents a share. Coming off one of its best years in history in 2013, Ford reporting fourth quarter earnings of $1.27 billion and full year 2013 earnings of $8.5 billion, the second highest in the past decade. Worldwide sales are also up 12% to 6.3 million cars and trucks. And drug maker Pfizer's fourth quarter profit plunged 59% because of discontinued operations, restructuring, and competition for generic drugs. The world's second biggest drug maker said its net income fell to $2.57 billion, or 39 cents a share, from $6.32 billion a share a year earlier. Pfizer's been criticized for not having enough drugs in the pipeline. The House and Senate reaching a deal on the long overdue U.S. Farm Bill, and it may cost some Americans. The 5-year bill ends a pricey direct subsidy to farmers while expanding government-backed crop insurance programs. It also trims spending for food stamps for poor Americans by about 1%. Not sure what that has to do with farming. Both the House and the Senate still have to vote on the bill, expected to cost close to $1 trillion over the next decade. Teen clothing retailer Abercrombie & Fitch has stripped its CEO of his chairman duties. The move comes amid investor pressure to reduce Chief Executive Michael Jeffrey's control over the struggling company, and possibly because of Jeffrey's occasional gaffes. Arthur Martinez, the former head of Sears, was named non-executive chairman. Resale prices for Super Bowl tickets are in a tailspin, although at this time last year there was speculation that the Super Bowl, to be held in the New York area, would be the priciest ticket ever. Brokers say the market is soft and tickets are available for much closer to face value. Brokers are blaming in part the cold weather. Imagine sitting out there next Sunday in this weather for the outdoor game, and that the team's home cities, Seattle and Denver, are too far away and they have too few fans anyway. Being queen isn't what it used to be. According to a report by British lawmakers, the royal household overspent on its budget last year, leaving just £1 million or $1.6 million left in financial reserves. Compare that to 10 years ago when there was more than $30 million in its reserves. That's historically low, and the result is that they are having trouble maintaining all those palaces. They can't even fix the leaky roofs, according to the report. So where does more than $50 million in taxpayer funds go for the royals each year? Well, they spend it on the staff, wages, maintaining their palaces, and they sure do take a lot of trips. Maybe time to get a job. Ahead, risking your life for a video game. Our favorite person is next. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests, and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange, a follow-up to Monday's Our Favorite Person. You'll recall that venture capital billionaire Thomas Perkins compared raising taxes on the rich to the Nazis rounding up Jews during the Holocaust. Well, now he's back with more. Perkins appeared on Bloomberg Television and mentioned his fancy watch. There you see it. He showed off the watch from high-end designer Richard Mille, a watch said to be worth more than $100,000. Perkins commented on a New York Times article asking why anyone would need a Rolex watch, to which Perkins noted that he could buy a dozen Rolex watches with his one watch. Which brings us to our favorite person of the day today, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. We've all heard stories of people running into burning homes to save a loved cat or dog. But what about your beloved Xbox? Apparently, an unnamed man in Kansas did just that. The Daily Dot reports that the man woke up to find his house on fire. He threw on some clothes and ran out the door to safety like any normal person would do. Then the man, an avid gamer, realized that his Xbox was still inside because it doesn't have legs and can't run out. So he ran inside, braved the flames, and secured the game console. He made it out okay, along with the Xbox. What caused the fire? Apparently, it may have been an overloaded electrical box. Shocker, literally. So, our unknown gamer is our favorite person of the day. Up next, the modern-day sweatshop is something called a click farm. We'll introduce it to you when we come back.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
One of the great things about Arise Entertainment 360 is we have this Arise to Your Health segment, which really focuses on the holistic approach of being healthy. So we do everything from working out to juicing to getting in shape by doing fun exercises like bouncing on a trampoline or wearing these bouncy boots on our feet when we're jumping all over the set. We've done karate, we've danced the weight off, we've done just about everything. And of course, I love when we eat on set, but we do it in a very healthy and clean way.
Before social media, to imply that you liked someone or something usually did not mean it added value to it or made it more desirable financially. Now, liking something on a social media platform such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram is translating into a whole lot of cash for celebrities and businesses around the world, especially those businesses that rely on the value of credibility. This gives way to a new industry considered by many to be the new sweatshops, click shops, set up by companies who employ real human beings in third world countries for pennies a click. Open Forum editor-at-large Rod Kurtz is back here on Arise Exchange.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. This is really unbelievable because I didn't think about it. They're actually paying people to sit there and go click, 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 click.
Well, I was actually backstage taking a picture that I'm going to Instagram later, and I promise you that's legit. But yeah, this is a growing concern, and it's interesting because companies are putting so much time and effort into social media now. They finally awoke to the news that people are on it. This is how you communicate with your customers, and everyone wants to be liked. And the problem is there are companies, individuals, you see it on Twitter, Facebook, and elsewhere, that either employ bots, machines that do it, or increasingly we're seeing these click farms. It's kind of crazy.
And the people, is it more effective, by the way, to have people do it than bots?
I think the reason you've seen this emerge is that they can claim, and you've seen some of these click farms, people in the news say, well, it's real people.
It's real people, it's legitimate.
They're doing it, but it's the kind of traffic that you want to get. What's interesting is this is not the first time we've seen something like this. A few years back, we had something that was known as content farms, where you had a lot of websites that were creating, basically worthless content, jamming it full of keywords so that it would show up high on Google. What happened? Google woke up, they got smart, they changed their algorithm, and basically put these guys out of business. So I think we're on a similar path.
What countries are behind this, do you think, the most?
We've seen in the news, I believe it's Bangladesh is sort of the source of a lot of this traffic. It's interesting, you can trace where it's coming from, and chances are, a lot of American brands don't have a ton of fans in Bangladesh, so they are able to trace it, and I think the social media giants, Facebook and Twitter, they're going to wake up to it because it's just a growing concern.
We call this sweatshops. Is it a sweatshop for the people who work there?
From reports that we've seen and read, that there are people in some of these places in Bangladesh that are literally working all day long, clicking, literally for like $1 a day. So, it may not be as dangerous as some of the sweatshops we typically associate with parts of the world like that, but, not a great way to make a living.
Well, you remember when Kathy Lee Gifford was caught up in the real sweatshop of her clothing line being made. What about the companies that are employing these click farms? I mean, what is the responsibility there?
Well, it's certainly, I don't think it's something that these companies brag about. And I think as more light is shined on it, segments like this, as we see more reports in the news, people are going to wake up. The reason I think it'll probably go away is that it almost inflates the baseline. So if everyone
is doing it, it's like everybody being on steroids.
Exactly. I was going to make that analogy that if everyone's hitting 80 home runs a year, what's the point? So.
But what is the social responsibility now to, just as the clothing makers had to shut down these sweatshops, what is the responsibility for the technology companies?
I think this almost, in a sense, looks worse because it's very manipulative. I think companies...
And it's total fraud.
It's basically fraud, and I think companies that may engage in this are kind of looking at themselves and saying, maybe we should dial this back. I think, it's less about morality, in a sense. I think it's just good social media behavior to do it in a legitimate way, to market yourself in a legitimate way. This race to the bottom is never going to work long term.
I hate to bring the government into it, but does the government have maybe a role to play here in cracking down on click fraud? Because it is fraud. You are costing somebody money.
This has been going on since the dawn of the internet. You used to have companies that would create pop-up ads that they would count as page views. Right. There is some regulation, I think, that needs to come into play because this is the new kind of commerce, and the government, as we all know, regulates traditional commerce. This is just the next chapter.
So what do you think is going to happen to these click farms? Because as you said, at some point it's just not going to have the value. It is not like making shoes for 10 cents an hour.
Right. I think that what's going to happen is companies that are engaging this are probably going to start dialing it back. I think the social media companies are going to try to crack down on it. There's some statistic out there. I think there are like 14 million bogus Facebook users out there, which out of 1 billion isn't a lot, but that's still 14 million. They're mucking up the experience.
And Twitter accounts are fake as well.
Absolutely. I see it all the time. I get followed by people who I clearly know are not a human being. And, so you do see this anecdotally. And again, I think not only are you going to have sort of these crackdowns and these pullbacks, but it's just not going to be an effective technique long term.
So what do companies need to do then to get legitimate likes and legitimate followers instead of just paying somebody?
Yeah, I mean, this is my business. You want to create an authentic message and have an authentic dialogue with your customers. Social media is supposed to be a back and forth. It's not just you, announcing coupons and promotions and all that. You really want to have a dialogue, and I think bringing customers into that conversation is how you create that loyal following and get liked.
Rod, we got to go. Rod Kurtz, thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Finally, folk legend Pete Seeger has died at the age of 94. Seeger, who sang with legends from Woody Guthrie, to Bruce Springsteen, was as known for his political and economic activism as much as his music. He pressed hard for both labor and human rights issues with songs such as If I Had a Hammer. We'll leave you with a little bit of Pete Seeger. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching.
A time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time